the Gay Voice, we got with us nationally syndicated talk radio host and author of 50 Things Liberals Love to Hate, Mike Gallagher. Along with him, we also have the executive director of the Log Cabin Republicans, Gregory T. Angelo. Both Republicans, but on different sides of the aisle when it comes to the issue of same-sex marriage. Both cases are up before the Supreme Court this week, Prop 8 and the Defense of Marriage Act. So let's get started. Many people today say that to deny same-sex couples the right to marry is the same as to deny interracial couples the right to marry. Many of the arguments against interracial marriages are similar to the arguments used today against same-sex marriages. For example, it's been said that to allow same-sex marriage is opening the door to polygamy, and that exact same argument was used back in 1967 against interracial marriages. Now today, the majority of society can see it was wrong to stand against interracial marriages. Why don't they see how that applies to same-sex couples today?
Well, I'll start. I think there are two distinct issues that surround the entire same-sex marriage debate and conversation that we're having right now in the country. I think there's the issue of discrimination against gays and lesbians, and there's the issue of redefining marriage in our country. And those are the two separate issues that I think a lot of activists have successfully melded into one. I think to answer your question, Philip, a lot of people, particularly who have a deep faith and a religious conviction that marriage should be defined as one man and one woman, will have a very difficult time making that connection between the definition of marriage and the civil rights movement or of racial inequality. I mean, I understand why you'd say that, and I think I clearly understand how people can feel that way, but I'm just going to tell you that the resistance from people of faith would be enormous to try to make that comparison. Now, having said that, I do think right-minded people deplore discrimination, and this is a very, very important issue in terms of same-sex couples being denied hospital visitation privileges, the financial considerations, and the differences between heterosexual couples and gay couples and lesbian couples. And so for me, I just think that the whole dialogue has been sort of hijacked by people who understandably want gay marriage to be the law of the land immediately. And they have pretty successfully convinced a lot of people that you know, this is not about redefining marriage. This is simply about affording rights to gays and lesbians. And so I just think that we've made a mistake in sort of letting the dialogue go in that direction. I think we should stand tall and defend all Americans from discrimination. But that's a separate issue, at least from my perspective, and Gregory may disagree, but I think that's a separate issue from the debate before the Supreme Court right now, at least in terms of Prop 8 and DOMA, and that is the redefinition of marriage.
Sure, and I guess I'll pick it up from there. Mike, I appreciate the fact that we're having a civil discussion about this, and I think that's one of the things that differentiates people on the right when we have disagreements. We have civil debates about these things as opposed to trying to shout down the opposition. And just for the record, I certainly don't think, Mike, that you are a bigot because you don't believe that, for example, I should be allowed to enter into civil marriage partnership. I think you're wrong, but I don't think that you're
well, by the way, let me clarify. I never said you shouldn't be allowed to enter into a civil union. As a matter of fact, I'm a big proponent of a civil union. You know, you put three words together there, civil union marriage. I think there's two separate and distinct issues. I think the definition of marriage is issue one. I think issue two is whether same-sex couples should be given the same legal protections as heterosexual couples. And frankly, Gregory, I happen to believe they should. I don't think there should be a discriminating factor, and same-sex couples should have one less privilege or right than a heterosexual couple. That's what I mean by being a separate issue from the redefinition of marriage. But I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I want to make sure I clarify my position. And I've had this position for years, and I think it's a very mainstream position. I think there's a lot of Americans who, if asked at the ballot box to vote for civil union status protection for same-sex couples, they would enthusiastically vote yes. It's the issue of. Go ahead.
Yeah, Mike, I'd just say that we're kind of beyond that point, I think, right now. And when I said civil marriage partnerships, I didn't say civil unions. I just did want to point out that distinction. And this is really what's at the crux of this debate, right? I say civil marriage partnerships. Whenever I talk about what we're fighting for as log cabin Republicans, civil marriage between committed same-sex couples, that's a piece of paper that you get from the government, the same piece of paper that a heterosexual couple would have that gives you the rights, protections, responsibilities, and, as I always like pointing out, burdens that often come with engaging in a marriage contract in the eyes of the government. A lot of the opposition that I have heard when it comes to same-sex civil marriages from individuals on the right who are opposed comes from a religious definition that they have with the word marriage and a difficulty that they have with giving the word marriage to committed same-sex couples. And as you say, you're talking about the redefinition of marriage. My definition of marriage is two loving individuals who form a contractual commitment to support one another and provide for one another for the rest, what should be the rest of their lives, and to engage in the protections and benefits and again burdens that come with that. What we're not fighting for is any sort of redefinition of a sacrament of holy matrimony, which is a blessing that is given to a union in a church between, or a synagogue for that matter, between a committed couple, their minister or priest, and God. Churches should be free to be able to marry anyone who they want. There are certainly churches out there that do marry same-sex couples, but this should not be conflated. A religious sacrament should not be conflated with what the gay advocacy organizations such as Log Cabin Republicans are working for, and that is civil marriage partnerships. And when it comes to civil unions, for us it's a matter of separate but equal. And right now we have 9 states in the District of Columbia that allows civil marriages for committed same-sex couples, and no church has ever been forced to perform a same-sex marriage. So I don't think that especially from those who have deeply held religious convictions, that they don't believe that a sacrament of holy matrimony should be imparted to same-sex couples. They have nothing to fear from civil marriage becoming the law of the land for committed same-sex couples.
Right. Well, 2 points. I mean, first of all, to your issue, and I think you answered your own question about churches that are free and willing and able to marry same-sex couples. There is no shortage of churches in the United States that are absolutely perfectly capable today of marrying same-sex couples. And frankly, if we have any belief whatsoever in the concept of separation of church and state, and a lot of people on the left, as you know, Gregory, love to cling to that. If there indeed is a court-determined separation of church and state, then churches shouldn't have to rely on the government's definition of marriage in order to decide whether or not to marry a couple. Again, there is no problem with a gay couple being able to find a church to marry them in 2013 America. So I don't know that position stands. Secondly, your definition of marriage, and this is very crucial. This is why this is such a legal watershed moment for all sides involved. Your definition of marriage could ostensibly protect 2 brothers who want to marry, or an adult man who wants to marry his adult daughter. You only defined it as 2 people who want to enter into a contract and a loving bond and all the things that you said so eloquently. However, as Justice Sotomayor said this week in her questioning from the bench, then what restrictions will be left if we decide that the government's acknowledgement of marriage as being defined as one man and one woman changes? And that is precisely the point, and that's why, listen, I say this frustratingly because, and I've said this on the radio show many times, I'm probably the least homophobic conservative radio host there is. I have gay friends. My first radio job I was hired by a gay man who was a mentor to me and a man that I admire to this day. I don't have that hatefulness that some of my conservative and even Christian brothers and sisters have for gays and lesbians. But I think that it's very important that we distinguish between the legal question of how we define marriage and the societal acceptance of same-sex unions. And I think they are two separate issues, but I think you got to be very careful, Gregory. Every time somebody gives me that kind of definition like you did about basically two consenting adults, realize how many categories of consenting adults there could be, i.e. a father and a daughter, or two brothers and two sisters.
Yeah, I hear that side of the argument. It's curious that liberal Justice Sotomayor pointed out the slippery slope argument, but for that same matter, it was really interesting and exciting this past week to see conservative lawyer Ted Olson completely rebut her on that point and state that when you talk about the issue of committed same-sex couples entering into civil marriage partnerships, it should not and cannot be conflated with something like polygamy, with something like a father marrying his adult daughter if she's of age, because then at that point you're plugging into issues of patriarchy, you're plugging into issues of coerced discrimination, etc. I'm no Ted Olson. I'm not as eloquent as him, but the point that he was making is that you already have, the court has ruled on partnerships such as that, and I would just point out that we have right now. It's been almost 10 years since the state of Massachusetts has allowed committed same-sex couples to enter into civil marriages. And in the nearly 10 years since 2004, when that ruling came down by the courts, you've had 8 states in the District of Columbia that have allowed civil marriage partnerships, not civil unions, but marriage for committed same-sex couples. And you have not had this major push from fathers who want to marry their adult daughters, and you have not had a push from polygamists who want to have a harem and marry 8 wives. That just hasn't come to pass. So here's the thing. In 2004, when that initial Massachusetts ruling came down, there were a lot of people on the right that said, here we go down this slippery slope. And while I didn't agree with those individuals, I could certainly see how that could be a concern. To a degree, we were entering into uncharted territory in the United States in 2004. And as the states often are, Massachusetts was this little bed of experimentation to see what happens if you allow same-sex couples to marry. And what's been proven the truth over the course of again, nearly 10 years at this point, is that you do not have this slippery slope. You do not have a push for fathers to marry their daughters or people to marry their horses or one woman to marry 4 men. That just hasn't come to pass. So I think that that's an argument that doesn't hold up when you look at what has actually come historically to transpire.
Yeah, but I'm not arguing on behalf of what I think is going to be a tidal wave of polygamy. That's not the point. In fact, that misses the point. The point is how the government is going to officially acknowledge something that has been this bedrock foundational principle for many, many years. Now, the tide is turning, and we go back to the 9 states that you cite, and that's kind of a slick thing to do, is to say 9 states now allow this. As you know full well, and in using the Massachusetts example, that was a judicial activism result. 6 of the 9 states came from the judiciary, not from the legislative or democratic process. Now, in November, 3 states, for the first time ever, and I absolutely agree and admit it was a watershed moment, 3 states for the first time allowed voters to vote on the subject, and the voters of those 3 states passed it. And I suspect that trend could continue, and I think the true conservative position is not to allow judges to dictate their will upon the will of the people, which is exactly what happened in 6 of the 9 states you keep citing, but rather let the people decide. And I like the way you as you phrased it in the beginning about a civil disagreement, being able to talk about this important issue civilly. There's a real big difference between conservatives and liberals on all these kinds of issues in terms of the tone and tenor, and in fact in terms of the courts. Proposition 8 was decided by the voters of California. And instead of accepting the will of the people, activists immediately took it to the courts, went to the Ninth Circuit, which is notoriously liberal, and now, of course, it's before the Supreme Court. I don't hear one legal challenge from conservatives and if there are any, I apologize in advance, but I don't know of one legal challenge to the 3 states that on November the 6th voted in favor of gay marriage. We conservatives accept the will of the people, and that's why I think the big picture, looking at this issue from 35,000 feet should be the Supreme Court should and likely will kick this to the states. They're not going to make a broad sweeping federal, mandate on this issue, and let the states and let the voters decide. And again, I'll again repeat the difference between the right and the left on this. The right accepts the will of the people of those 3 states. Clearly, the left did not accept the will of the people in California, and that's why Proposition 8 is before the Supreme Court today.
Sure, and I have to say, Mike, I think we're in agreement on this one. I think we're certainly in agreement, at least on the way that the Supreme Court's going to end up ruling on Proposition 8. Just you can never actually predict the court. Sometimes they can surprise you. Who knows? The court might come out with its decision at the end of June and determine that marriage is a tax, and by that logic, everyone should be enter into a marriage. That's a bit of a joke, by the way, about Obamacare.
Well, and listen, the other joke is let gays and lesbians worry about alimony and divorce court and everything like the rest of us have.
Right. All right, but so let me tell you where I'm coming from on this personally, because yes, the conservative in me says let's allow the states to decide this, and I certainly understand that were the court to have a very broad ruling on Proposition 8, completely not only overturn it for the people of California, but say that committed same-sex couples should be allowed to enter into civil marriage partnerships across all of the United States, I think there could be some real pushback because traditionally we are the United States of America. We are not one state, and I don't think that the answer to everything is just to federalize everything. So, if the court kicks it back to California, and even if they kick it back to California and say Proposition 8 should be upheld, I think that just means we have to redouble our efforts there on the ground, and we can, I think as Justice Alito pointed out this past week, the Constitution of California has been amended over 500 times, right? I mean, we could talk about how ridiculous that is, but the work and the lobbying would continue, and I think that I am confident that we are in a trajectory where we are going to be at full marriage equality for committed same-sex couples in a term that is shorter rather than longer. Here's the rub, though. It's very easy for me to say, as a resident of Washington, D.C., and speaking to you from my family's house in Connecticut, where I am now, that of course the state should decide this because I live in a territory that recognizes marriages between gay couples, and I'm talking to you now from a state that has recognized those marriages for quite some time. But it's very difficult for me as a gay man talking to log cabin Republicans members who live in California right now, whose partners might not live to see another ballot referendum on this issue, who have to deal with the possibility of death tax and their estates being wrenched from them by the hands of the government, even though they've been in a relationship for decades. Not unlike the Edie Windsor case that brought forth the Supreme Court case on the Defense of Marriage Act. It's very difficult for me then as a gay man to say, well, you just need to take your time or move a tremendous expense somewhere else simply because your marriage is not recognized in the eyes of the government, and it should be. So that's where I come from, and I just wanted to give that personal perspective on it.
And I will say that I understand the sense of urgency, and I think that's what led to the court challenge to Prop 8. Again, I have very good gay friends who feel completely a sense of almost despair that the clock is ticking on a lot of couples, and I truly do understand that. On the other hand, I think it's important for the pro same-sex marriage side to appreciate how difficult this is going to be generationally for a lot of people who have been taught from day one at Sunday school and in catechism and in church. This is a deeply religiously based belief that marriage in our culture should be defined as one man and one woman. This is not going to happen overnight. Now, I think there is an aura of inevitability going on right now. Again, back to the generational point, I think for young people, this is an old story. I mean, you know, as people my son's age and my granddaughter's age, you know, come into positions of leadership and as they vote, this isn't even going to be a debate anymore. And I understand that, and I fully appreciate that. But I do think there has to be a bit of an acknowledgement that this is bluntly put a very big deal. It's a sea change. It's an entirely different ball game for millions and millions of Americans, many of whom have deep religious convictions. You know, Bill O'Reilly the other night, who's a friend of mine, who I appear on, you know, once in a while as a Fox News contributor, said that really the biggest voices right now that are raising objections to this are people who are just thumping their Bibles. And, you know, I know how he meant that, and I know what I think what Bill meant to say, but you really can't minimize the deeply held religious convictions of Christians and Baptists and Jews and Muslims and people who do have a deeply entrenched, faith-inspired belief that marriage should be defined as one man and one woman. And so while I appreciate the sense of urgency on your side of this, Gregory, I think you have to understand that this kind of a change is going to be, you know, gradual. It's not going to be overnight. And frankly, I resent the heck out of the judicial activism that has been sort of employed to try to get to that end. And that's the frustration that a lot of us feel in terms of saying, you know, okay, you're not getting your way with the voters this time around, so let's make sure we file a flurry of lawsuits and take this before the Ninth Circuit or the Supreme Court so we can get our way. And that's difficult for a lot of people to accept, and I hope you understand that.
I understand that. I appreciate that. But here's kind of the rub, and here's the interesting thing, and here's why Log Cabin Republicans does the work that we do, trying to get more conservatives to become supportive of, again, civil marriage, just in the eyes of the government, because religion and religious convictions are so important to many on the right, if not most on the right. I don't want to say that people on the left do not have religious convictions, but I'd certainly say that the preponderance of people on the right do, and it's specifically because of those religious convictions and the protection of them that it is important for conservatives to come to understand and support the importance of, again, just civil marriage in the eyes of the government. And I say this because I come to Log Cabin Republicans' national office as the executive director, having been chairman of Log Cabin Republicans of New York State during the legislative vote that took place, no judicial activism, but a legislative vote in a Republican-controlled chamber where Republicans said to themselves, and then in conference and committee, we know this is coming. We know that the momentum, certainly in the state of New York, but also nationally, but at the time we're talking 2011, momentum is going in towards support of civil marriages for same-sex couples. And it's going to pass, whether it passes in a Republican-controlled chamber or a Democratic-controlled chamber. And if we allow it to pass in a Democratic-controlled chamber, the Democrats will run roughshod over religious liberties. In fact, they won't protect them at all. There will be no protections for churches. There will be no protections for nonprofit status, for religious institutions. So let's do this right. Let's make sure that there is a civil marriage bill in the state of New York, and make sure that it includes rock-hard protections for religious institutions. And they actually created some of the most comprehensive religious protections that have ever been enacted in a same-sex marriage bill. There was a non-severability clause there. It said essentially that if there are, all right, same-sex marriage is the law of the land, but if there are any sneaky liberals out there that want to use this as a means for changing a church's definition of marriage, that is, if there was a gay couple that were to stroll into St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City and say, we deserve to be married here in St. Patrick's Cathedral, we don't care if the Catholic Church believes marriage is between one man and one woman. Same-sex couples can marry in the state of New York right now, and if you don't marry us, then you deserve to have your nonprofit status rescinded. And if that couple were to take their case to the courts in New York and the courts were to rule, yes, you're right, it is unconstitutional for the Catholic Church not to marry you in St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York, then the marriage law becomes completely annulled. That is a non-severable clause from the marriage bill, and that would only be there because Republicans made sure that it was there. You see this in Illinois, where you had Jason Barrickman, Illinois state senator, Republican senator, made sure that there were religious protections and religious carve-outs in the marriage equality legislation that they put out there. He understood the difference between civil marriage and holy matrimony. The Republican senators in New York understood the difference between civil marriage and holy matrimony, and they wanted to make sure that those religious protections existed. So that's certainly something that I think needs to be made clear, and that's one of the reasons why I think if you truly care about your religious convictions about this, you should want to make sure that civil marriage, when it is enacted, not if, but when it is enacted, has those religious protections and carve-outs.
Listen, there's no question that there are some strange bedfellows in all of this. I mean, you mentioned Ted Olson, and this is as rock-ribbed a conservative as anybody is ever going to find. And as Ted Olson is the lead counsel arguing on behalf of same-sex marriage before the Supreme Court, that causes a lot of people to have to do a gut check and ask themselves if their position has been correct or not. Senator Rob Portman's evolution on the issue is a powerful story. And like many, like other Republicans before him, Dick Cheney and others, it came as a result of a loved one who came out to them, or a loved one who happened to be gay or lesbian. And so, there's definitely, this is not real clear-cut in terms of political or ideological lines. And I definitely think that your side has a great deal of momentum. Again, all of us on the radio, I think, and who are conservatives, talk about this inevitability. I happen to be a big Gingrich fan. I admire Newt a lot, and I know you guys have been involved in terms of talking about the Chuck Hagel nomination and Gingrich's position on all of that. There's a lot of I think, enlightened conservatives who have definitely evolved or changed or altered their position against same-sex marriage benefits and all. And so, it's an important, healthy discussion to have. I saw one column this morning that said that it was a column about conservatives coming out in favor of gay marriage, and the conclusion in the column was that all that's going to do in terms of many of the people behind the same-sex marriage effort is just cause them to hate conservatism and conservatives a little bit less. I mean, you know better than anybody what a kind of a bizarre position you're in to say that you're a Republican or a conservative and gay or lesbian or in favor of gay and lesbian equality. There is such a lack of tolerance. One of the great ironies of this debate is that same-sex advocates decry a lack of tolerance, but there is so much of a lack of tolerance on the part of many of the activists who are taking the lead on this issue. Hateful things, and Prop 8 was a great example of that. I mean, who will forget images of little old ladies having their Bibles ripped from their hands and their picket signs, and stomped on by angry activists. Now, there's extremists on both sides, but frankly, the proof is in the pudding. Ultimately, like I said, there's no legal challenge by conservatives or Republicans to the 3 states that voted for this, and yet there are immediate legal challenges anytime the voters exert their will. I think that conservatives ought to respect the will of the people. And I do think, and the polling is suggesting this, anecdotally, it seems that it's changing. And if it's changing, let that change occur. But I think there has to be, back to your original comment, a degree of civility to this. And I think there is, by the way. I think it's gotten a lot better. even in the last year or two than it used to be. But there has to be, my side has to have a deeper appreciation of what it feels like to feel like you don't have the same legal protection as another category, and your side needs to have an appreciation that there are people with deep faith and a deep abiding belief that marriage, the very definition of marriage, is a godly inspired concept that is one man and one woman. That word is a sacred word, and I just think that as long as we have an attempt to see the other side's point of view, progress is going to be made, and I think it's progress that people are going to be able to live with.
Mike, you said that they should reflect the will of the people, but many people feel this is a form of discrimination. Many folks would say this is a right that should be afforded them that is being denied, and basic rights are never awarded by a show of hands. So just because more people may have voted to deny this right before, it doesn't make it right. And that is when you would need the judiciary to step in and take a stand, when you believe it's discrimination.
Well, and that goes back to the argument, and I've heard this, that thank goodness, that the people didn't get to vote on slavery or, women's rights to vote, the women's right to vote and all that. And I appreciate that. No right-minded American should defend discrimination. And again, we should be moved by stories of same-sex partners being denied hospital visitation rights. Those stories are real. We should be moved by teenagers committing suicide because of their hard-hearted parents who literally, rejected them, their own flesh and blood, because they came out to them. Those stories need to be heard, and they need to matter. And I think they are. I think more and more Americans are understanding what you guys feel like to say we feel discriminated against. I wrote about this in my book, that I regret the fact that many of my Christian brethren are more worried about what gays and lesbians are doing than they are concerned about adultery or infidelity or prostitution or pornography or any number of other things that heterosexual couples engage in. And so that gets me in trouble with people on my side of the aisle, because they want me to pound the table harder and scream, about the evil sodomites who are destroying the world, I mean, and it's just there's a weird priority that many people have. Frankly, there's something about this issue that is deeply emotional, and there is a very poor response. But again, there's two sides to that. There's also been a lot of ugliness. I don't like being called a bigot, and I appreciate, Gregory, that you don't feel like I'm a bigot. One of the most insightful columns I've seen in this came from a guy I think it was the Chicago Tribune last week, I think John Cass, who wrote as a devout Greek Orthodox who frankly favors gay marriage. But he said, but what's going to happen if gay marriage becomes the law of the land? Are those of us who believe in our Christian or religious tenets, who believe that marriage should be defined as one man and one woman, or are we all going to be defined as bigots? And you mentioned that a minute ago, Gregory, about, in New York and being able to stroll into St. Patrick's Cathedral and then file a lawsuit if you don't get married. I mean, will people of faith, and there are many, be regarded culturally as bigots and because of their religious convictions? And that's a big question. That's a very big question that is yet to be answered.
Yeah, it's a big question, and it's here's the other side of the work that we're doing at Log Cabin Republican is to make sure that on the back end of this, when I will say, I'll predict the future, when same-sex civil partnerships, civil marriages are allowed to be entered into in all 50 states, that religious protections and religious beliefs are a part of this discussion and are acknowledged, and to make it very clear to everyone, and this is something that we obviously earn the ire of the left on, that if you don't support same-sex marriage for civil marriages between committed couples, that you are not a bigot. I'll be the first person out there next to you, Michael, putting my arm on your shoulder and saying this man is no bigot and his beliefs should be respected. And again, we can have a civil disagreement on this. I think that's one of the nice things about having this debate where we are right now is that the left does not like having debates and discussions. The left likes to completely shut off the other side of a debate, and I think this is one of the things that separates us as conservatives is that we agree on core principles when it comes to things like taxes, spending, Second Amendment, small government, etc. But when it comes to things we disagree with, we can have these types of thoughtful and respectful debates. This is why people ask me, Gregory, how can you possibly be a gay Republican? Well, this discussion that we're having here today is precisely why.
Well, and I have these discussions with fellow Republicans all the time, and I have gay Republicans who call my radio show on a regular basis. I mean, there is no, and that's frustrating to me because, frankly, a gay Republican is almost as loathed by a lot of people on the left as gays and lesbians are to some people on the right. Listen, it's not hard, Gregory, to define a bigot. The father who tells his 16-year-old son, you're a faggot and you're dead to me and get out of my house. That's not. You don't need a roadmap to figure out what kind of person that is.
Right.
But for somebody who struggles with the definition of marriage, and again, I really do maintain that that's what this is truly about, but has no malice in his heart towards somebody else because of their sexual orientation. It gets frustrating to me to hear, and you know better than anybody how often the left wants to shut down an opposing point of view. I go through it every day. I'm called a racist because I'm critical of Barack Obama's policies. I don't have a racist bone in my body, but that helps to chill the debate. That helps to end it. If I'm called a homophobe or a bigot, then I'm not allowed to express, what I think are thoughtful views about this very, very complicated issue. And so frankly, I think the log cabin Republicans do a great job in helping to sort of define these issues and to illuminate them and let people know that there is such a thing as fiscal conservatism, there is such a thing as sovereignty and national security and all the kinds of and less taxes and less government in our lives. Core principles of what it means to be in the GOP and your sexual orientation shouldn't have anything to do with it.
Yeah, most definitely, and I'd also point out that just to be clear, we're talking about right at this time right now we're talking about the Republican Growth and Opportunity Project, and people are talking about the Republican Party needs to embrace gay marriage in order to remain viable. I'll say this: the reason for conservatives to come around to support civil marriages for same-sex couples is not to win over the hearts of Democrats. It's not to somehow peel off Democratic votes. Log cabin Republicans, we're not doing this because we want to be loved by the left. In fact, we know we will never be loved by the left. We're doing this because, number one, it's the right thing to do. But second of all, the fact is that there are a lot of gay individuals out there who are politically unaffiliated, and even just taking the gay stuff off the table. There is a youth vote out there, a lot of young independents out there, and even young conservatives who might not even know that they are conservatives yet, but who cannot get over the position that the party officially takes on this issue of marriage. And to me, I think that marriage is a conservative institution. It's something that allows stability in committed partners' lives, but also it's something that is a conservative value. We were the first people out there starting in the 1970s saying that committed same-sex couples should be allowed to marry, and we earned the ire of the left in a way that you wouldn't believe, because at the time, interestingly enough, the left believed that marriage was a heteronormative institution. It was a bourgeois cultural institution imposed by the far right in order to subjugate the people, and we were the radicals to a degree at that point, even though we framed ourselves as conservatives, being Republicans, because we were out there saying that no, we just want to be able to have rights, protections, and responsibilities that heterosexual couples have, and the left did not like that at all. It's interesting how they've kind of come around to this, and this has now become somehow a flag that the left waves, when in reality at the outset this was something that they were we're opposed to. You know, we're coming at it just from the angle that this is actually a conservative institution. It is something that same-sex couples should be allowed to enter into for that very reason, and that beyond that, once we get past the marriage issue, it's important to point out the fact that I truly believe conservatism is the best philosophical approach to governing and to living and letting live, and it is the one way of governing society that allows individuals to the greatest chance for opportunity and success. So that's where we're coming at this from. This isn't about being liked by the left, not by any means, and I don't ever imagine to or aspire to be liked by the left.
Yeah, trust me, you ought to see my email inbox. I can relate. Are you still the interim executive director, or are you the full-fledged executive director now?
I am certified full-fledged right now.
Good. The log cabin Republicans are in good hands. You do a great job, Gregory.
And that's all the time we have for today. Hope everyone enjoyed the discussion and the dialogue. I'd like to thank Mike Gallagher and Gregory T. Angelo for taking time out to be with us today and discuss such a subject that is very dear and sensitive to many Americans today.